Welcome to Upper Valley Access,
your monthly video magazine. This month, Estelle Diamond of Wheelock Terrace introduced us to her book group. They're currently reading The Crucible. So Emily, do you vote, Emily?
So I just registered to vote in Vermont. I've always been a registered voter, but now that I'm a Vermont resident, I had to register again. But I think voting is really important, and primary season is coming up, and this is a big year for the presidential election. So I put together a little video about why you should be voting.
So Emily, I was really excited this month to be able to go to Norwich Bookstore and capture with the camera a reading by the author Jackson Wright Schultz, who wrote this really engaging book called Trans Portraits. He went out into the transgender communities in the US and collected oral stories from folks. And they're gripping, they're funny, they're thoughtful, and in this reading at Norwich Bookstore, he read maybe 4 or 5 of them. And so the full program is on our Vimeo channel, and there's an excerpt from it in this month's magazine.
So this month, Tunbridge Public Library started their Winter Evening Series, where they invite different professionals from Vermont to speak about their profession. So this month was a really interesting topic about genealogy, so how you can study your ancestors and lineage.
Do you know anything about your genealogy?
I know my mom's side came over on the Mayflower, which is kind of cool. Yeah.
But a strange rule of thumb, known to the unknown. You really need to have a strong foundation of who you are working on before you try to move back the previous generation. And the biggest pitfall with that generally is similar surnames or same surnames. So you have a John Smith here in Tunbridge, and you have a John Smith in Royalton, say, and the one in Royalton disappears right when the one up here appears. Well, logical assumption they might be related, but you have to be very careful with that. That's what I mean about knowing as much as you can about the person you're starting with, and then slowly moving forward. And this part is the part that most people seem to forget. It may remind you of high school, college. Cite your sources. And it is really, really important, especially when I think of genealogy is the perfect hobby for anybody. It's one that you can spend as much time as you want. You can put it away for a week, 2 weeks, year, a decade. You start right where you left off and you just move forward. So it's always there, something you can do when you have the time. But when you do that decade hiatus or more, like I have on some of my families, and then you come back to them and you didn't cite your sources, and I don't know about you, but my memory's not what it used to be. So I'm scratching my head trying to figure out where I got some of this information from. And some of it would have been very tantalizing and interesting information if I knew where I got it in the first place. So I was just telling you that you want to go to the primary source whenever possible. That is true with one exception when you're first starting out. Once you have a person identified to your satisfaction, then it's often quicker to go to a genealogy or a local history who's looking at a whole community or an entire family, especially with common surnames, Joseph Smith or something just down the pike there, sorting out all the Joseph Smiths. These genealogies generally have done a lot more work than you'll ever do to try to sort out which one is which.
This particular section has John Proctor and his wife, Elizabeth, conversing. Proctor earlier in the before the play actually starts, he had something of an affair with Abigail. Now, it takes about 4 or 5 weeks to read whatever we're reading, sometimes longer. And so that we've done about half of The Crucible. That's what we're working on now. I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but it's really a very tense play. Very tense. At first we started off with funny plays because they wanted to laugh. Well, I'm an English teacher, we don't laugh. But an English teacher always thinks that fiction is truth, and that's the way you reach truth, through fiction. So I had that opportunity. But, it's not easy to break through. There's one man here who was very bright. Well, they're all bright, the ones that come. And he never read literature. He was an aeronautical engineer. And it was kind of a thrill to him. That he should be reading fiction. Because they never thought that fiction had anything for them. We meet once a week. And we meet Wednesday morning at 10:30 until about 11:45. And we read consecutively. We tried the first time we got together on assigning roles, but it was too confusing. And it doesn't really matter in terms of the story. No. I don't give them their books to take home because they forget them when they come. One of the things that, unfortunately, that goes is that memory. It's the way it is. What happens to people who come into an institution like this is that they quickly lose their cognitive abilities. It just goes with the territory. And what I'm trying to do is to keep them involved in something that's imaginative, that allows them to extend themselves. So we do pretty well. The ones who come, and there are 8 of them that come pretty regularly, or maybe what I should say is 6 come regularly, 8 are involved. And that's pretty good. Well, when I first came here, I'm here 3 years, I'm a social person, and I engage people, and I couldn't engage anyone. I couldn't get a conversation going. And I thought, oh God, what am I going to do?
What is most fun about this for you?
Survival. I mean, if I didn't have this, I wouldn't have anything that stimulates me. I'm a very teary person. I don't know whether it goes with being an English teacher, but there are things that touch me. And when I was a teacher in high school, it was like that too. And this time, we were reading The Merchant of Venice. And one of the women said, I never dreamed I would read Shakespeare. The teacher dreams of reaching students, which rarely happens. We have to cater to the way they are and their needs, because that's the whole point, to see if we can have them experience something which they wouldn't experience.
Let me tell you why I'm here. This is a serious time for all Americans. And in considering the stakes in the November election, for me, the single overriding issue of all others is the state of our democracy and whether we're keeping its implicit promise to leave it better than we found it. This is the challenge and goal of an authentic patriot who wears his passion for a better America on his sleeves. So for his outspoken and courageous leadership, his candid and consistent pledge to that all-American ideal, I am here tonight to join in that untiring effort. And as a former chairman of the National Democratic Party, to proudly endorse Bernie Sanders for our party's nomination for President of the United States. Thank you all.
Let me thank all of you for coming out tonight in this room. And let me thank all of the people in the overflow rooms for being out as well. It's a great turnout. You know, about 8.5 months ago, we began this campaign. And when we began, we had no money, we had no organization, we had very little name recognition around the country. Other than that, we were in pretty good shape. And not to mention, we were running against a candidate who was deemed by the media and the establishment as the inevitable nominee of the Democratic Party. Well, a lot has changed in 8.5 months. Today in Vermont, my state, today in New Hampshire, sounds like we got a few Vermonters here, huh? But in my state and in New Hampshire and all over this country, the reality is that millions and millions of people are working longer hours for low wages. You have a situation where mom's going out to work, dad's going out to work, kids are going out to work, marriages are stressed, parents are not spending enough time, quality time with their kids. And despite the fact that in America, our people work the longest hours of any people in an industrialized country. Japanese are very hard workers. We work longer hours than the people in Japan. Despite all of that, 58% of all new income generated today goes to the top 1%. You want a radical idea? How about creating an economy that works for the middle class rather than a handful of billionaires? In my view, right now, and what this campaign is about, is essentially asking why. Why are we the only country on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all people? Why do we have more income and wealth inequality while we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country? Why is it that the middle class continues to disappear with people working longer hours for lower wages? Why is it that millions of people are leaving college deeply in debt, unable to buy a car, buy a home, sometimes unable to even get married? Why is it that we continue to maintain a corrupt campaign finance system that allows billionaires to buy elections? Why is it that we are not vigorously leading the world in combating climate change? My friends, I am very optimistic about this country. And I believe that, in fact, when we stand together, when we are capable and stand up and take on a billionaire class whose greed and irresponsibility is destroying our economy, when we don't let the Trumps and the others divide us up, there is nothing that we cannot accomplish. We have the wealth to do it. We have the intelligence to do that. So what this campaign is about is not only for you and your parents, but it is about the children of this country and leaving them a nation whose potential we know we have not yet achieved. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
This is an oral history project. I started it when I was a master's student at Dartmouth. I had a really unique opportunity to travel around the country and talk with 34 transgender individuals. I talked to a few more than that, but 34 people had their stories make it into the book. And so I went to conferences all over the country, and I really got to interview people from very, very diverse backgrounds, with really, at the beginning, the only commonality being that they were all transgender identified. So before we hear from the interviewees, I'll provide just a little bit more narration to contextualize the upcoming stories. While many transgender people recognize cross-gender feelings at an early age, they're not always presented with the information or resources that they need to make an informed decision about whether socially or physically transitioning might be right for them. Trans folk often suppress their feelings and desires for years because they lack the vocabulary needed to express their gender identity to others, because they wish to, or are forced to, better assimilate to a dominant culture that encourages prescribed binary gender roles, because they don't know that transitioning is an option, or because the most commonly discussed trajectories for transition do not fit with their own sense of self. We're going to hear from Vicky next, who's in her 20s and lives with her parents in New Mexico. And although my interviews with Vicky were very brief, they're the interviews that stick with me the most, because I think her experience is really powerful. She says, "I've had cross-gender feelings my entire life, but I've only had the vocabulary to express my identity for the past few years. I knew I wanted to transition, but when I brought it up with my counselor, my other mental health issues came into play. I put myself in a vulnerable state by telling my counselor that I was transgender and intended on transitioning. She replied, 'But you have schizoaffective disorder. How can you possibly know that you're trans? How could you possibly know what's real about your identity?'" That's how I feel. Happily stated. Next, we'll hear from Felipe, who is a project controls manager for a construction company in Alaska. He says, "In Alaska, you can still lose your job or be evicted for being gay, much less trans. I'm protected through my company, which is one of the reasons I picked them. All of these companies are playing the resources game because there aren't enough experienced and educated individuals in this area. Oftentimes, another company will try to recruit me, but because they don't have policies for LGBT folks in place, I won't even look at them. It gets really hard to explain why without outing myself. I'm protected right now, and I will not lose my job over being trans. If I move to another company, I could. I feel some amount of comfort knowing that I have some protection in place. At the same time, my roommate and I could all get evicted at any point for being gay, so working in Alaska still has its downsides. Just as intersectionality impacts identity, it also impacts the way that we experience discrimination. Supriya moved from the U.S. To the U.S. from India to pursue her MD. She says, "The last time I visited my family in India, I had a layover in Turkey. I was stopped in the airport no fewer than 6 times. 6 times I was asked to remove my shoes or other parts of my clothing. 6 times I was asked a series of invasive questions about my gender, about my nationality, and about my green card. 6 times my bag was unceremoniously searched. Before I left the US, I was standing in line for coffee prior to my flight, and an officer pulled me out of the queue and submitted me to hours of questioning. I was viewed as a suspicious person. I don't think there is anything brow-raising about my drink order. I suspect that my real crime was flying while brown. Of course, once they took me into a back room, they asked to see all of my documents. My passport, my green card, and other forms of ID were all obtained at different times. In some of the pictures I look more masculine, and in some I look more feminine. Even though all of my IDs say female, and they say my correct name, I received each one at a different point in transition, so they do not necessarily reflect me exactly as I look now. A simple interrogation led to hours of investigation while I explained over and over again why my ID pictures were inconsistent. They finally let me leave, but I had missed my flight. While discrimination continues to be an issue, I think that many policies and prejudices are beginning to change. And I think, in part, that's because of the activism that I see happening within these communities and outside of these communities. And one of the most remarkable trends that I found when collecting these interviews was this tendency toward activism. Nearly every individual whose voice is featured in this project engages in activism on a regular basis. The experiences of each of the interviewees differ greatly based on factors such as race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, age, ability, sexuality, HIV status, religion, and a plethora of additional social influences. The characters are so diverse that I often felt they had very few common denominators. However, one of the commonalities I discovered was an overwhelming involvement in activist endeavors. Their definitions of activism were as varied as their gender expressions, but every single interviewee participated regularly in activist pursuits. From large protests to political lobbying, from educational outreach to using a set of pronouns that sparks a conversation, each of the characters told me stories of engaging in activism in their everyday lives. This project has been an incredible journey. I've had an amazing opportunity to delve into the stories of dozens of incredible transgender individuals. The accounts they gave me of their lives were both inspiring and heartbreaking as we probed into the uncharted territories that lie beyond the gender binary.
Thank you so much for tuning into this month's magazine. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have any ideas about topics, stories, events that you would like to have us cover in the future, let us know. And Emily, how should they let us know?
So you can come visit us at the Tip Top Media Building, 85 North Main Street, White River Junction. Or you can send us an email, info@cutv8.org.
I look forward to hearing from you.